will recommence. We have a panel here called Impact and the Future of the Ref. I'm not sure we're going to say what the future of the Ref will be, but we will note that there will be a Ref in the future, or something like that. And that impact will likely be a bigger part of it than it was in the documents that we have just submitted. So here we have a collection of people to help us think through how we can, various ways in which we can achieve impact by engaging with a select committee, Mark Egan from the Transport Committee, with government, Ross Neilson, Cabinet Office, with the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology, which now explicitly includes social science in that definition, with Abbi Hobbs. And then Naomi Russell from the LSE. Naomi is somebody who's been working with EdPage on a course which won the PSA's Innovation in Teaching Award last year, which involves students effectively doing a piece of academic research and trying to make that a publishable quality. And the project you've been working on is about academics in the media. So we have the excellent situation where a politics student is telling us how we might best achieve our impact as politics academics, and I think that's just how it should be. Each is going to speak for 10 minutes-ish, a little bit more, a little bit less, leaving us plenty of time for discussion at the end. We'll go through the order as on the slide, so it's to Mark first.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm Mark Egan, I'm the Clerk of the Transport Committee and House of Commons. Very grateful for this opportunity to come and talk to you all about my perspective on how academics can engage with and have an impact on the work of select committees. I put all this in and I suddenly realised I was talking to a room full of political scientists, so I want to assume that we know quite a lot about select committees, but just if you need a quick refresher, there are lots of types: departmental, cross-departmental, etc., etc. I'm going to talk primarily about departmental committees, which are the main ones that shadow the work of government departments. They look at the spending policies and administration of government departments, but that can range quite widely into really anything that even a vague ministerial responsibility can be claimed for. They're cross-party, they have a built-in government majority, and they aim to work consensually, so the idea is to come up with reports which are not divided on party lines. And the new development since 2010 is that the chairs are elected by the House as a whole, which gives them a bit more impact, a bit more independence from the rest of the members, and has led in part to the greater impact in the media. Every morning on the TV programme will be some select committee chair telling me about something, and that's really a function, I think, of the fact that they're now elected by the House. What do? We meet once or twice a week. We have lots of inquiries. We usually run several at the same time. We have quite a formulaic approach to it. So we call for written evidence. We get in lots of written evidence. We then have oral evidence. And the word evidence is a bit of a misnomer. It's opinion primarily. And we then produce a report. One of the differences between a select committee and a think tank like the Institute for Government is that the government is obliged to respond to each of the recommendations, and if you don't like the response, we send it back and tell the government to try again, which I've done a couple of times in this Parliament with the Transport Committee. And there's also a lot of other stuff which goes on, which sometimes isn't so obvious. We do some pre-legislative scrutiny, post-legislative scrutiny, which isn't very popular with members, but it's on our list. We do pre-appointment hearings, which are an attempt to look a bit like the US Senate. And we have a lot of things below the surface: seminars, correspondence about different issues, private meetings that the chair of the committee has with various interested parties. I should say, by the way, that I'm talking obviously about Commons committees. There are select committees in the House of Lords as well. They are fairly similar, but they tend to work at a bit of a more leisurely pace. They tend to do one inquiry at a time and go into issues. That's perhaps the downside. The advantage that they have is they tend to go into things in a lot more detail than Commons committees do. This are our end products, lots of these little reports which are in green, which are now primarily on the internet. and just to show off that I can use PowerPoints and pictures, including Mr. Murdoch's big moment in Fundamental Culture, Media and Sport Committee. So I want to focus on how best to engage set committees. Firstly, talk about written evidence. We put out calls for evidence quite often, probably every 3 or 4 weeks. We're asking the public for opinion about areas. We usually try to give fairly detailed guidance as to what the committee is interested in, if only to stop people ringing me up and asking that question. We have a deadline. Deadlines can be quite short, they can be quite long. We're usually pretty flexible about deadlines. We're always open to renegotiation. It's not often that we say actually the deadline is meaningful. We put it in because people always ring us up to ask what the deadline is, as much as anything. It's very important to remember that your core audience when you're writing is members of Parliament who don't always have the longest of attention spans, and you make the most impact on page 1, preferably in the first half of page 1, with some short, simple bullet points, some things in bold. You've got to think about your core message. What is it that you think the government should be doing? That's not to say we don't like detail. The committee team likes to see lots of detail. We like to look at things in more detail sometimes. Detail can be put in an annex, can be put at the back of a submission. You can always offer more detail and we can ask for it if we need it. If we get 20 or 30 pages, chances are we'll send it back and say it's not really suitable for the committee. Committees then decide who they want to call for oral evidence. It's a slightly mysterious process from the outside. The truth is that we will, as in the staff, working with the chair, will have an idea of the types of people that we think are of interest in that particular subject, and we're going to give perspectives that the members need to hear. If you haven't been called, or if you think you'd like to give oral evidence, volunteer. If you haven't been called, or you don't think you've been called, bring us up and ask why. We are open to persuasion. It may be that we haven't thought about a particular perspective, and that if you put the case to us, we'll slot you in. It is pretty flexible. We did slot in somebody on the day last week. I don't like to do that too often, but it's not a very bureaucratic process, and we are open to persuasion. Most committees will group people in panels, so you'll be on a panel of 3, 4, 5 people. There is sometimes an attempt to create a debate between different perspectives on a panel. Sometimes different people with similar sorts of perspectives will be grouped together. That can confuse witnesses, and it's very important, I think, just to be assertive if you're called to give oral evidence, to make sure you get your points across. Sometimes members don't always know who the witnesses really are, and they tend to pick on the person who sits in the middle, or the person who answers the questions most quickly. You've got to push yourself forward a bit, and if at the end you don't feel you've maybe done yourself justice, send us a note, write to us, get it on the record. We are very keen to make sure everyone has their say and has their chance to have their say, and it doesn't come away from the process feeling that they've been overlooked. We also employ specialist advisors. There is a great, I don't know who wrote this phrase about information which is not readily available, or to elucidate matters of complexity in the committee's order of reference. It's an excellent bit of phrasing from the 1970s, I think. Essentially, the committee team relies, we're quite small. There's only 2 clerks. On my committee, we have 2 clerks, a transport specialist, and a couple of admin staff. So we have to cover all the different modes of transport and all the different inquiries that are going on at any one time. So we rely on outside expertise to help us identify who the key players are in a particular area, to try and separate the good arguments from the bad arguments, to help us understand issues that are particularly difficult, maybe to do a note for the committee on something that's very tricky. The chair likes to talk to specialist advisors, we sometimes ask the advisors to give a little presentation to the committee in private about an issue. Some of these advisors are academics, some are consultants. We don't pay a great deal of money, I'm afraid, but it's on the CV. I think it is genuinely interesting to the people who do it because they are part of a corner of the political process. We are increasingly recruiting specialist advisors through open competition. Previously, it tended to be a question of thinking about who you know in the field, but we are trying to broaden it out just to get a better balance of advisors and better quality of advisors. So it is very much the sort of thing where academics can engage and make a difference. And we appoint probably 1 or 2 on all of our subject matters, so at the moment we've probably got about 10 or 12 on our books. I thought I'd give some, this would be better in your slides than on the screen, I imagine, but I thought I'd give some examples where academic work has made an impact on the Transport Committee in the last couple of years. The picture of the ship on the left is an academic paper which was sent to me. I didn't ask for it, it just appeared one day in my inbox from I can't remember what it's called, the Siemens Institute, or the Centre for Sea Research or something like that, at Cardiff University. And they had spotted that we'd done an inquiry on sulphur emissions from ships, which had been in response to a European proposal, which itself stemmed back to an international convention from a few years before. And they had done some work on how to implement the new rules, and they came up at the end with, it was quite a short paper, quite accessible, and at the end there was a list of recommendations, and I realised that none of those recommendations would be answered by anybody, so I, with their agreement, got the chair of the committee to write to the department to say, here are some interesting recommendations, we'd like you to respond to them. And that led to a bit of dialogue between us and the government about how you can implement, it was all about the resources available to the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency and this kind of thing. And that the people at Cardiff were very pleased and took their research on a little bit, and I felt that we and the committee understood the issues with the practical implementation of a high-level piece of legislation much better as a result. The bit on the right is from one of our reports, which is about low-carbon vehicles. The committee is a bit sceptical about the government's support for low-carbon vehicles through a grant which reduces the cost of the cars, but the grant's been abolished now, but reduces the cost of the cars by about £5,000 per car. They're still very expensive. And amidst all the opinion that we get sent was the results of a survey from some academics at Parliamentary University, who were then called to give oral evidence. And one of their key findings from a study of what people made when they were given one of these cars to drive around Coventry was that the overwhelming response was, these are great, if I could afford a second car, I'd have one of these to drive around the town. And that actually led to a recommendation from the committee and a conclusion that was in our press notice, which they got all over the press, which is, should the government be spending such lots of money on second car runarounds for people who are quite well off? And the answer turned out to be no, because they abolished the grant. And finally, committees can commission research. We have a small budget which we can use to commission research on things that we're interested in. This is where my PowerPoint skills ran out, so I just did a picture of the screen. And it's research. This is Oxera, who are transport consultants, did some research for us on how you would fund a new airport if you were to build one east of London, and also what the implications of that might be for an existing airport west of London, such as, for example, Heathrow. And their conclusions were, their main conclusion, which was very decisive when it came to the committee's deliberations on the subject, was that Heathrow would have to shut down. And that was very heavily reported in the press, and the committee in fact came out very much in favour of Heathrow expansion, and that was their major contribution to the debate on airport capacity. So what should you do? From a transport perspective, sign up to our mailing list, look at our website, follow us on Twitter. All committees have quite interactive, well not interactive, quite better websites than they used to have. Quite a lot of information, we're very information rich. And most of us have Twitter accounts that we use now to do a lot of our publicity and to ask for stuff. And certainly we respond to stuff if people ask us questions on Twitter. Not all committees are in that league. And I would also say, be proactive. Don't wait to be asked about something. Don't wait. Press your research on us. Tell us what we're up to. Make contact with committees and get us interested, because we are very keen to hear more about what academics are up to. That's just a quick thing about how tiny our teams are. And if you want to contact me, feel free.
Okay, we'll hold questions till the end, except for the one I want to ask you now. The audience, that is. You will have signed off your ref impact case studies recently, and I'm presuming the heads of department will generally have seen them. How many of those present who can remember what's in them used select committee evidence giving or stuff in reports? More hands going up. So they're excellent. There's something that genuinely is working with here. So.
I should say I was interviewed by Ref about the Coventry academics, and I was very complimentary.
we'll come back to that perhaps at the end. We will move directly on now to Ross, if we have the gadget. There we are.
Good afternoon. It's delighted to sit on such a distinguished panel and diverse panel with people from different parts of the political perspective. And I'm also particularly pleased that there's a student on the panel, given that they will be the future pipeline of civil servants, or academics, and dare I say it, maybe politicians. So, highly relevant session for them to be contributing to today. Just before I go on to my presentation, I wish to remark very briefly on Mark's. Much of what he said in terms of engaging with committees within Parliament, I'd echo actually for engaging with government departments, both officials but also ministers, particularly the point about being brief and succinct and getting your comments in a timely manner, because often policy making happens in a very iterative way and fast-paced. I'm sure you're aware of that already. What I'm going to speak about this afternoon is an initiative that the Cabinet Office has been involved in, working very much in partnership with other government departments. So we've been engaging with at least 8 other government departments, also working very closely with the ESRC and other major funders in this area to really improve the use and generation of evidence, both across government, nationally, but also locally and elsewhere. And so I'm going to talk about the What Works network, which was launched in March by ministers at an event held in Leicester, along with the ESRC and other organisations, and really talk about the efforts that are happening to really try and improve the use and generation of evidence across government, which ultimately you should be interested in terms of the government officials and decision makers using your evidence to improve their decisions. So ultimately the whole What Works agenda has 3 main key areas that we're interested in, about generating better quality evidence, so that's about improving the quality of evidence as well, transmitting it in a much more effective and clear way, which is actually easily accessible for policy and decision makers, and then to try and improve the adoption. It's great that the evidence is there, but if it's not used and people aren't building it into their decision making and into their policy making when they're designing policies at the very beginning, then it isn't really worth much. And I think that takes it to the heart of some of the rationale where the What Works agenda comes from, particularly, and I'm speaking from a kind of civil service point of view, being that there's generally in many aspects of social policy, the use of evidence is not systematic, it's not fully embedded as much as it really ought to be within across government. I think in some areas it's much stronger. So in health, there's a strong culture within the medical and clinical profession in using evidence and generating evidence, but in other areas of social policy, that's not as strong, and there isn't that strong link there. From a civil service point of view, there's a difficulty in accessing evidence, and it struck me when I spoke to a university professor about 8 months ago, and it never occurred to them that civil servants just do not have access to online journals. So all the wonderful, rich source of data which you produce and you churn out, and it's so significant in the rep as well, in terms of how you're judged in your assessment, there's a difficulty in accessing that information. And I'm not saying there is no access, but across the board it's inconsistent. And then when you get to that information, it's the quality and the usefulness and the applicability for the policymakers can sometimes be less, it can be questionable. So those are some of the underlying issues that we're trying to address and improve. And so that's led us to, in partnership, creating the What Works network, which I'll speak about today, but also as being the Cabinet Office and government, trying to undertake wider efforts to really improve the use and generation of evidence across government inside. And so I'll talk a little bit about those two. So the What Works network is an independent network of 6 centres which have been set up to summarise, share, and rank the quality of the evidence and share it in a really accessible way with decision makers to try and make it more accessible in terms of building it into that decision making process early on. Hopefully they will ultimately be affecting spending decisions. One of the drivers here about trying to improve the use of evidence is that going forward there's going to be a much tighter fiscal settlement across government and beyond, and so therefore there needs to be a more intelligent approach to using the evidence to really understand what works and what doesn't work. And I really emphasise that. In some ways we call it the What Works network, but we should really call it, it should really be presented as the What Works ? Network, because We really need to understand what works, what doesn't work, and what circumstances, and how can you really use that evidence. So really trying to improve the use of evidence across areas of crime, ageing, education and early intervention, local growth and health. And those initial thematic areas were picked because they were considered to be significant areas of public spending. They cover around £200 billion worth of public spending, which is a significant sum of money. There was a demand, crucially, and this is a key part of the What Works approach, a demand from people in those sectors for evidence. So in local areas and local enterprise partnerships, there were users actually saying, we're developing these local economic strategies, but should I build, should I invest in infrastructure, or should I get Mary Porters to come and tile up my high street? What's the evidence base and what's the most effective approach there? And there was a feeling that they just had difficulty in accessing that evidence base. So I'm delighted to say that we've commissioned these centres broadly in partnership with academics, and it was really pleasing actually to see such a strong set of bids coming from academics and presenting their bids to run these centres. So the Local Centre for Economic Growth is a consortium of LSE, along with Centre for Cities and ARAP. And we tried to apply that multidisciplinary approach across the network, recognising that the skills that are needed to be a What Works Centre are actually quite broad in terms of having the academic rigour and in terms of synthesising and summarising the evidence, but then distilling that evidence and sharing it with users, so local authority, commissioners, head teachers, doctors, nurses, clinical commissioners. It's got a broad set of people to engage, and so therefore we've tried to undertake a real partnership approach and involving people from a whole range of different skills in delivering this network. It's worth saying the network will be growing. It's likely there'll be other networks joining this, but what we're really focusing on is trying to get this network up and running and be an effective network to draw together evidence and to put it in front of decision makers to really help them make intelligent, evidence-based decisions. And I want to just draw on a point there in terms of, from a government point of view, in terms of using evidence. Evidence isn't an issue in town. This is not a panacea, but it's about trying to create a more intelligent approach and sophisticated approach to using evidence across government, and recognising that evidence can be it should be a significant part of the decision-making process. To that end, I've emphasised the independence of the network, and they're deliberately independent because these centres may come up with findings which are unpalatable to ministers, to probably some policymakers, some politicians. And so they are very much independent. But what we wanted to do is make sure there was a strong link into government, to making sure that they do weave into and are embedded within government. So to that end, David Halpin was appointed as the National Advisor by Ministers with the responsibility of helping the centres link their findings across government. That means he has a team, which I'm part of, and there's a team of us working to support the improvement of the use of evidence across government. And one of the things that we're doing, and some of you may have seen this, is that we're going and working with departments to review the quality of their evidence base, looking at what the efficacy of their current evidence base is, how well equipped they are to having good evidence in the future, and what's their capacity to really use evidence. You know, how are they using it? How are they actually building it into their policy-making cycle? It's not just about producing evidence from analysts, it's about getting the policymakers to be working with analysts, designing policies that can be evaluated, that can be tested, that we can actually find out, are we getting value for money? Does this programme, does this policy make a difference? So we're really trying to just get some fundamentals embedded across departments. So initially we're working with separate departments to answer those questions with a view to conducting that review across government. I'll just give you one example of what I think is one of the best examples to date of the What Works approach in action is the Education Endowment Foundation, who are one of our What Works centres. They've taken quite a lot of evidence in the space of education, attainment, and what interventions are and aren't effective, and tried to distill that into a really easily accessible toolkit. I will emphasise to use this audience that this is a crude screenshot from their website. There's a much more in-depth tool online that you can go in and dig into the detail of the data, telling you where they've found information about different interventions. But essentially what this does is lists a whole range of different interventions, ranks and states the cost of each intervention, creates a quality metric in terms of the evidence quality using the University of Maryland scale, and then developed an impact measure on average how much attainment gain has certain intervention. created. Now, there's a significant debate within the academic community about this and about its validity and how useful it is. And the EF have evolved as to over time. But rather than being stuck in a debate for 10 years about whether or not how to present this in the most effective way, they've just done it and gone and created the first version as this is part of a journey in terms of improving the use of evidence. And that's what I'd say to you about the What Works approach, is this is really much a journey that we're on and evolving and improving the use of evidence there. So I'll just close my comments there.
Many thanks indeed. We'll go straight on to Abbi and hear a little bit about post.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and just going back to Parliament now and what I was saying about government. So I'm just going to pick up from where Mark kind of left off really. Because I'm aware that whereas everyone is generally aware of the work that select committees do, most people haven't heard of Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. So I was just going to go through how we're situated within the rest of key kind of information sources within Parliament, and then move on specifically to the social science section and how academics can engage with our work and demonstrate impact from that. So Mark's already discussed the committees, but there's also a library both within the Commons and within the Lords. They cover a range of policies from kind of social and general statistics, social policy, science and environment, transport and so forth. There's about 150 members of staff in the Commons and about 35 in the Lords. And their work tends to be largely connected to the legislative agenda and to individual interests of MPs. So in terms of the work that they do, they tend to respond to individual questions by members, and that's a confidential service. And they also prepare briefing papers, which are short briefings on bills that are going through Parliament and on wider areas of policy. The other kind of key ones to be aware of are MPs and peers researchers. I put them in grey because they're not employed by the House, so they're employed directly by members, which means that in terms of how the rest of Parliament is formally structured, they're not that involved, but they're a very important part of who is actually getting research evidence and information more broadly to members and to peers. So we're situated as a bicameral office, so we are between the Commons and the Lords, which is quite unusual. And the other ones that are also bicameral are all-party parliamentary groups, which are probably mainly all aware of. So they're all cross-party groups where MPs and peers come together around shared interests in particular areas. So in terms of what we do, our role is really to support evidence-based scrutiny, legislation and debate. And there's a number of ways in which we do this. If I just go through briefly how post overall is structured, and then I'll tell you how social science came into it. So I think our governance is important because it shows how you can impact and feed into the work that we're doing. So we have a board that consists of MPs, peers and a few ex officio members of the academic community within science and technology. And we also have representatives from all the different departments across both the Commons and the Lords. In terms of staff, we're really very small, so we have a director, 7 advisors, soon to be 8, and 2 support staff, but we more than double our capacity through a scheme of fellowships, which is where we get PhD students in their 2nd or 3rd year come to us for 3 months to work on a briefing. And we've just this week launched the paperwork for the ESRC scheme, so that will enable about 15 PhD students to come over the next 3 years. So I would encourage you to let anyone know in your departments that they're eligible to apply for that if they're funded by the ESRC. So in terms of the section, since it was founded over 20 years ago, it's always had a section on biological sciences and health, one on physical sciences and ICT, and one on energy and environment. And then with funding from the Economic and Social Research Council and support from University College London, in September we launched a social science section. So the ESRC have kindly given us funding for 3 years to see if by integrating social science into the work of POST we can more effectively inform and enable evidence-based scrutiny within Parliament. So I'll come back to social science specifically, but in terms of the work that POST does, I'll just go through our kind of key things because we're very distinct both from select committees and from the library. So unlike select committees, we don't make recommendations and neither do our board about particular policy decisions, but our role is to review the available evidence and to make a kind of balanced and independent analysis of what the key issues are for parliamentarians to consider. And unlike the library, we're not responsive, so we do horizon scanning to decide what issues are coming up based on research that's being conducted within academia and within industry and NGOs. And we spend a lot of time out and about meeting with people across the disciplines to find out what they're working on and what we should be putting forward because it's likely to come up soon. We also work with select committees in the library and look at the legislative agenda and what we know is coming up within policy where we might be able to contribute to the debate. So then in terms of our process of work, it's also very different from how select committees and libraries work. So we're best known for post notes, which are kind of 4-page briefings, which give a succinct overview of the available evidence base. And we do approximately 30 to 35 of these a year. And the way that the process works is that we will do a short period of 2 to 3 weeks of literature review, and we use academic databases in the way that you would if you were doing literature review for an academic project, but it's very small scale. It's in no way a systematic review, and we're reflecting on the robustness of our methodology at the moment as part of the project. But from there we will go on to do interviews with approximately 15 to 25 stakeholders, so they're across academia, industry, NGOs, government departments, regulators. So we don't consider them primary research in the way that you would within social science research, but they're used to flag up potential issues, direct us to literatures which we might not be aware of, and to speed the process up. From there, they're internally reviewed for writing style, accessibility and structure internally, which involves one advisor from each of the sections. And then all of the people involved in the interview process and a number more academics involved in the external review process. So it's a very robust process in terms of ensuring that it is balanced and independent and portrays the issues well. So it takes approximately 3 months to go through the process and produce a poster. We've also been trialling post boxes, which can be commissioned by a select committee who have got a particular question where they would like our approach to do a quick analysis of the evidence. They also sometimes go into library briefings if the library feel it beneficial for us to do something in a bit more depth than they have been used to do. And we're just evaluating the effectiveness of those at the moment and whether we'll continue doing them in that form. We also run a lot of events and seminars. These are always open to members of the public, so they're advertised on our websites and anyone is welcome to come along who's interested. And you can also get involved as speakers, which I'll come back to